So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay. And it's good to be back in Silmarillion. I've actually been given a few Silmarillion battle replays, I think 3 or so that I'm going to be using. Really, and it's not too surprising that there has been a little bit of a gap because they have been working on quite a few things, including 2 new factions that have been added to the game since the last time I showed a Silmarillion battle replay off, one of which we're going to see in this free-for-all today. Few new units as well for the existing factions, and some pretty significant overhauls of the central mechanics in the game, which we will be going through as and when they are relevant. And this is the reason why I'm going to be doing the free-for-all first out of the 3 battles I'm going to be doing in Silmarillion over the course of the next week or so, because a free-for-all like this is a good place to sort of see all of these mechanics at work, potentially all in tandem, except for the things which are only really relevant for the orcs, but that can be handled in another battle which I've been given. Regardless of that, we will be going through these mechanics, but not in too much depth. I'll just be sort of mentioning them and what they're all about as and when I see them. But if you do want sort of more detailed analysis, especially on the new factions, the new mechanics, or the new units, then I would recommend you go over to JMonster's channel, because he has explained all of this in good detail. And JMonster is the one who sent me 2 of the battle replays I'm going to be doing in Silmarillion, and he is going to be one of the factions on the field today. It's going to be an all-elf affair, sort of a King of the Hill style thing, and it is also worth mentioning as well that this free-for-all, the most kills wins, and that is the rules of the game, so it's not necessarily who is the last one standing. So the standard thing of doing a free-for-all where you leave some units perhaps hidden in the trees or something like that until the end, or play things very cautiously, isn't necessarily going to work this time. And it's a relatively even playing field as well, because all of these factions are elven, so they're all going to be a little bit more quality inclined perhaps, and that is going to be how we kick things off. But Ossiriand actually, ironically enough, are probably one of the best factions you could be in more of a classic free-for-all, because they can more easily hide their units and sequester them away for later on, and they're all about that guerrilla warfare. They're not quite as good in just a straight-up brawl, but they do have tools for that as well. Sentries of Gallium, which are hiding, of course. It's rare that cavalry can hide anywhere, but if anyone can do it, the Green Elves can, possibly the Haladin as well. They're one of the new factions, which bear quite a lot in common with Ossiriand in terms of style, albeit they accomplish things in different ways. But as horse archers go, you know, they're going to be good at dealing damage, relatively good anyway from horseback, but as with most of the entry-level Ossiriand stuff, especially when it comes to horse archers, they can easily be skirmished down by other archers. Relatively light armour, of course, but a good harassment tool, very fast, and of course you can pull enemy-mounted units around all over the place with units like this if your micro is good enough. Another unit of Ossiriand cavalry as well, another unit of sentries of Galleon, so plenty of micro going to be going on here from Ossiriand potentially. Again, that's really just down to the players how well you can utilise that, but JMonster's been playing long enough to be able to use them well. The Randirim and Tolgalen, of course, body-piercing arrows, the only body-piercing archer unit in the game, and that's going to remain the case, at least on foot, I know that, in Silmarillion. So obviously a very useful tool. If things do blob up, then the havoc something like this can wreak, as we've seen from the Rangers over in Reforged, can be very, very substantial. But their ammunition is somewhat limited, and also in melee they're actually slightly weaker now, so if you do manage to catch them off balance, no longer are they sort of an upper end light infantry with really good melee defense. They can still hold their own well enough, but no longer are they on that sort of level. They're still expensive, but again, they do have a weakness in melee, and of course, like most Green Elf stuff, they can be skirmished down themselves, so you've got to be careful with them. They are a somewhat difficult unit to use, especially on a field such as this. Up here we have the Ondohyando Ensan Athrad, which is a new unit for the Green Elves, so one of the first new things that we're going to be seeing. And essentially they are an armour-piercing archer. I think it was going to be somewhat necessary for the Ossiriand Elves to have some sort of way of dealing with armoured units, especially with the Nalgrim, the dwarves, looming large on the horizon. Feanor obviously in the game as it is, Angband as well. Difficult matchups for the elves of Ossiriand, because they don't really have a ton of AP, and because they do most of their business at range, a lot of their arrows would bonk off the armour and not do all that much. Now obviously as an armour-piercing archer, their ammunition is again going to be somewhat limited, and they do share the same sort of weaknesses as the Randirim in the fact that they're not brilliant in melee, and they are somewhat weak to other arrow fire, at least in comparison to a lot of other units in the game. So again, they have a very specific purpose, but still very nice that the elves have got that sort of long range armour piercing option, because it definitely gives something to the armoured factions to think about. Then back in the main line we have several units of Hunters of Rathloriel. This is going to be another example of a new mechanic at work, because there are technically 2 types of javelins now in the game. There are non-armor piercing, lower damage but very high ammunition javelins, which are sort of more designed for sort of general skirmishing, poking the enemy a bit, harassing them, and just being a constant presence throughout the game. And also sort of the more traditional javelins where they're armor piercing, high damage, not a lot of ammunition, but they're going to do a lot of damage to whatever they hit. And that's going to be sort of split between the two. Generally speaking, the lighter javelins, such as this, the soft target javelins as we shall call them, or harassment javelins as J-Monster has taken to calling them, they do tend to be hybridized with other types of units. So the Hunters of Rathloriel are also sort of light spears in melee, which are not as good as the regular sort of, as you would expect, not as good as the dedicated spears in melee by any means, but they can still hold their own in that role, as well as having that ranged attack, which over time can do a decent amount of damage. So a good sort of hybrid front line here for Ossiriand. Got some more cavalry as well in the Outriders of Dweilwen, which are very swift moving, very high damage off the charged lancers, but of course, as with most things Green Elves, they do tend to lack a little bit in terms of the armour and survivability next to their kin. And we have 2 units of them, which are pointing towards the Fingolfin army, which we'll get onto in just a moment. Scouts of Gellion, which are of course standard light archers, which can hide anywhere, also pull out those 2 daggers in melee, which gives them, they're not very high base damage, but they are armour piercing. So they do pack a surprising sting in melee against the right kind of units, but obviously you don't really want to be using them for that purpose if you can help it. Spear Host of Rathloriel are of course the dedicated spears of the Hunters, which we saw in front of them. They definitely have some boosts in melee, which makes them worth bringing, as opposed to the soft target javelins, which the Hunters have. Got some Earthen End Tower, which is not the General's Bodyguard unit actually, it's the half-strength version, the detachment of the Earthen. Very good unit of archers this, heavier than a lot of the other Ossiriand archers, and also have that axe in melee, which is one of their armour-piercing tools up close anyway. So that's obviously a very good unit at the centre of their army, good for getting kills, which is what this game is going to be all about. Scouts of Gellion, more Spear Host, and finally we have the Kinsmen of Denethor, which are now no longer 2 detachments, they are a singular unit, and they have been boosted to be more of a sort of bodyguard unit. I'm still not convinced by 1 HP bodyguards in a game that sort of dabbles with both single HP and multiple HP bodyguards. I'm not fully convinced by them yet, but I'm more than willing to be proved wrong. But that's what the Kinsmen of Denethor are. They are a single HP bodyguard with very, very good stats, and of all the Ossirian bodyguards, they're probably the tankiest and most defensive place to put your general, because obviously they're spears, shielded, decent armour by Green Elf standards, and of course cavalry isn't going to want to tangle with them quite so much as they would potentially with something like the Mythern and Tol Galen. So that is J-Monster's army. We shall now move on to a blob force over here of Feanor, played by Frodor Baggin. Feanor, to be fair, haven't had quite so many tweaks. I think they've only really had one that we might see. Generally speaking, though, they're much the same, other than the general changes to stuff like javelins, which I've already mentioned. Mounted Company of Karufin, of course. Obviously, mounted javelins are going to be very, very useful. They need to be careful they don't get skirmished and pulled around the park, though, by the Scouts of Gellion. Footmen of Amras was only the first level of armour upgrade, actually, but in a battle where kills are king, you need to make sure that your main line is going to be as strong as possible to not give up as many kills as possible to the enemy. So obviously Feanor are going to be pretty damn good at that. Riders of the Pass, I mean, as a horse archer goes, they're probably going to be superior at skirmishing than the Scouts of Gellion are, but there are more Scouts of Gellion, which is going to be very interesting to see. Hunters of Caligorn, which are the regular lancers, obviously very heavily armoured, very high charge. We're actually not going to see the Roqueni by the looks of things, which is a shame, because they have been changed to sort of mace cavalry instead of the sort of regular knights they were before. But such is the way of things. Defenders of Aglon without the armour upgrade, but they of course are going to be really, really good, especially against the lightly armoured Green Elves potentially. Very useful unit. Shield Bearers of Halavorn, the basic Edine spears that we've seen before. The Accursed of Alcolonde, which of course relentless, so it means they can't be staggered. They can do a tremendous amount of damage to the right targets. Again, the Green Elves are really going to want to avoid the Accursed in melee like the plague. They're going to have to try and use their cavalry or their archers on them, otherwise it could be really, really bad. They're the sort of unit which can really rack up an impressive kill count. Stalkers of Thargelion are the soft target javelins, so plenty of ammunition, but again, not armour piercing with their thrown projectiles. 2 units of Archers of Amrod, very good for skirmishing, one of the better units for skirmishing in the game. Previously I would have called them the best. That is not the case anymore, however, and we might see what is the best in another army. We shall have to wait and see. And the Otorn and Mighty Mo, which is a good choice for the bodyguard on this occasion because they're so survivable and tanky. And given that this is a kills-win sort of scenario, that is very important. Now, Captain Gervais is playing as the hidden city of Gondolin. This is the first time that I've actually shown Gondolin off, even though I'm sure you've probably seen them already at this point, because J-Monster has shown them a couple of times. I think Pixelated Apollo even did a replay on the Gondolin map with Gondolin defending, which is really, really cool. Got some Armourers of the Hammer. Now, I will be going through this more quickly than I would normally because I don't want to waffle too much, and J-Monster has already explained them in depth anyway. But the Armourers of the Hammer, Gondolin do tend to be definitely more about their elites, which in a situation like this is going to really help them because it means they're not going to give up quite so many kills and their units are going to be a real nightmare to deal with in melee. They don't tend to mass up individual units quite so much, even though they can. And yeah, all of their units are based around each house of Gondolin, which is really, really cool. Armourers of the Hammer are a line infantry armour-piercing unit, which is going to be, I think, really useful on this occasion, because this is the sort of unit which is going to be very useful against Feyenoor, probably going to be useful against some elements of Fingolfin as well. So it makes a lot of sense to have brought some Armourers of the Hammer. But other than that, they are just a very good unit of armour-piercing line infantry. This is a somewhat unique unit, though, the Shield Bearers of the Tower. They are just a spear and shield unit, but they are somewhat unique in the fact that they have a much denser formation, so you can't push through them quite so easily, and they use their spears overhanded, and a combination of a different animation and this dense formation gives them almost like a pseudo spear wall type effect. It's not quite as effective as when a pike or a halberd will do that, but it gives them sort of a kind of diet version of that, which can be really, really useful actually. And obviously they don't have the same weaknesses that pikes and halberds tend to have in the fact that they're shielded and, you know, defensively much more able to stand up to archers and the like. So it's a very interesting unit, the Shield Bearers. It'll be interesting to see how they perform here. The General's Bodyguard going to be the Retainers of the King, which is the bodyguard unit, which is again more focused around being more defensive, shielded, you know, sword and board units. They have units which are multiple HP and that you could put your general in otherwise, but for a situation like this, I think they just want to keep their general safe and save them for later. But yeah, very nice unit indeed. This is what I would call the best unit of skirmish archers in the game now, because the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch are, of course, very heavy in the way that the Marksmen of Balar and the Footmen or the Archers of Amrod are, but they also have more ammunition, because they're the only sort of single-purpose archer unit that Gondolin actually have, so it makes sense they get given a little bit of extra ammo. Potentially a really useful tool in a situation like this, because you're going to be able to sit and shoot for a long time potentially with a unit like this, and they're not going to be giving up quite so many kills because of their really thick armour as well. So maybe we shall see them really shine in a battle like this. More Armourers of the Hammer. We've got some Gallants of the White Wing, which are again another unit of upper end line infantry. Very, very fine indeed. Obviously they don't have the armour piercing that the Armourers of the Hammer have, but they will be able to carve their way through something like the Green Elf infantry or the Edain auxiliaries from Fingolfin with nary a scratch on them. Champions of the Fountain, which actually are quite similar to the Accursed of Alqualonde. They are relentless, two-handed sword unit, very, very damaging of course. I don't know which of the two is actually superior in terms of stats, but they fill a very, very similar role. So they're going to be really, really dangerous for certain factions. Armourers of the Hammer, and back here he has some more auxiliaries. He's got 3 units of Scouts of the Tree, which are Slingers, which are low damage but armour-piercing projectiles at range, and they pull out a couple of axes in melee as well, so they're pretty decent there too. And he's got a couple more units of the Shield Bearers of the Tower. This, I think, is actually their loose formation, which goes to show how densely packed they normally are. But yeah, there they are. That is Gondolin. We shall be going through them in, I think, both of the other battles as well, actually. Unsurprisingly, they are quite a popular faction. Now, in the last patch, I would have called... Oh, no, this isn't Fingolfin. This is the Elves of Falas. Marksmen of Balar. Again, a very good skirmish archer, but they don't have quite the same ammunition level as the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch, and I think the Heavenly Archers are a little bit better anyway. So this isn't going to be quite the skirmish fight that the Falathrim would have been hoping for, I'm sure. But they are here nonetheless, and in a battle that's all about kills, archers are obviously going to play a big part when it's an elven war. Scouts of Eglarest as well. Gondolin don't have their cavalry on the field today, so potentially a bit of movement could be really, really useful against them. Seafarers of Brithombar, a bit of armour piercing, definitely going to be useful against Gondolin. Certainly, they're not all heavy armour, all about their heavy armour in the same way that perhaps Angband or even Feyenoor are, but when it comes to dealing with their better units, a bit of armour piercing is certainly going to be very, very useful. You can see back here the Spear Host of Brithombar, which are of course a soft target javelin unit now, as well as being light spears. Very nice for an entry level unit for the Falathrim to have a unit like that. Mariners of Erendil, again, very nice unit of line infantry. The Marines of Eglarest, which I believe are hard target javelins. So they're an armour piercing javelin, I think. Hybrid units like this are usually soft target javelins, but I think because the Spear Host is soft, I think that would make the Marines of Eglarest hard. That's what she said. But plenty of javelins on show for the Falathrim, which is kind of what you'd expect from them. More Seafarers for that armour piercing. He's got his armoured units facing the Green Elves, which is probably to be expected. Marksmen of Balar, the NIRNIAETH, backed up by the Marines of Eglarest, and more Warriors of Eglarest as well. So a pretty numerous Falathrim army this. He's got to be careful not to feed kills into his opponents here, Stewie, otherwise it could all backfire quite horribly bringing you an army like this, with the rules in place. Spear Host, Marines, and Scouts of Eglarest. It is interesting actually, I believe actually the Marines are the hard target javelins as well, because the Spear Host, they're very similar kinds of units, these two, but I think the Marines are hard target javelins now, or there's a lot of javelins in play for the Falathrim. I don't know which are hard target and soft target, but we shall probably find that out as the battle goes on. But without further ado, let's begin. Going to be quite chaotic, but we're going to open up with pretty much a classic heavy archer to heavy archer skirmish fight between the Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch and the Marksmen of Balar. Marksmen of the Heavenly Arch are out in the open, to be fair, whereas the Marksmen of Balar are in the trees. But Captain Gervais will definitely fancy his chances. 2 archers on 1, and individually I would say that his archers are also probably the superior choice anyway. Feyenoor are going to be claiming the hill in the middle, which is fairly bold because it does paint a bit of a target on their back. But we shall see if that proves to be significant. The Falathrim are going to be moving towards the hidden city of Gondolin as well. Scouts of Galleon moving forward. Shield Bearers of the Tower moving in. Need to be very careful here of their mounted company of Karufin. As you can see, using that overhand grip on their spears are the Shield Bearers there, which is really cool to see. What do we have here? Some damage being done to the more lightly armoured Brythonbar units again from the Sentries of Galleon, forcing the Falathrim into a retreat behind some of the geography of the map. The Falathrim instead choosing to go after Gondolin, which is kind of interesting. I mean, at least you know where Gondolin are, whereas the Green Elves can be much more awkward to pin them down, so I can understand. You can see the kills you're going for when you're advancing into Gondolin, not so much when it's the Green Elves. Meanwhile, Footmen of Amras are over here. Some Shield Bearers of the Tower have been left behind. They are still spears ultimately in melee, so against especially a unit of really heavily armoured infantry like this, the Spear Malice is going to be coming into effect. Cavalry coming down this way. Riders of the Pass are going to be skirmishing with the Scouts of Galleon as well. Mounted Company of Karufin are heading off in this direction too. I'm not sure if this is the best of ideas, because this is pretty much exactly what the Green Elves are all about. Move towards the enemy with your horse archers, bait something to come in and chase them, and then just move backwards and do the business. I mean, the Javelins are going to be able to get some kills on the Sentries of Galleon as they move backwards, but there's so many arrows coming in here that even the reasonably armoured and shielded Mounted Company of Karufin are not going to do all that well, and of course crossfire means that from some angles those shields are most certainly not going to be coming into effect. Marksmen of Balar moving forward, and there is a melee engagement happening here. The Armourers of the Hammer and the Shield Bearers of the Tower. Really good combination this of a defensive unit and a unit with more of an aggressive edge to it. The armour piercing isn't going to be the be-all and end-all against the medium tier Warriors of Eglarest, or medium armour Warriors of Eglarest. But still going to be useful, it's still not going to hurt certainly. Seafarers of Brythonbar, another armour piercing unit coming in. Seafarers of Brythonbar need backup a little bit more so than the Armourers of the Hammer, because they are a little bit more fragile. They do tend to work as more of a combined arms force than anything else. From those Spear Host of Brythonbar getting absolutely peppered by the Scouts of the Tree, using those slings to really, really good effect. Slings also coming into the background here. Again, a bit of armour piercing isn't going to go amiss. But the Falathrim getting held at arm's length a little bit here. They do need to get all of their units into play pretty quickly. Marines of Brythonbar seeing the danger, I think, and trying to just get into melee as quickly as possible. But they're going to struggle here against the Shield Bearers of the Tower, just because the Shield Bearers should be able to hold them at bay for a significant amount of time. And the Gallants of the White Wing are also coming around the side as well. So the Falathrim do need to get more on the front line, but the Falathrim are getting kills, and that is the key here. But the Falathrim are also going to give up a lot of kills to Gondolin, you would have to say. So Gondolin are probably really going to enjoy this situation here. There's some elements of flaming units back here. Scouts of Eglarest need to be careful around the stakes. Hunters of Caligorm are back over here after getting maybe a little bit too close to the Green Elves. The Green Elves are, going for their regular free-for-all tactic, really, of waiting till a little bit later before they make their moves. They're going to sort of try and tidy up the bits, I suppose, and hope to pick up as many kills as possible by doing that. Sentries of Galleon are hidden. Randirim and Tol Galen are firing. And that's going to be quite interesting. I mean, they're going to pick up kills here, but against the Shield Bearers of Halavorn? Maybe they just want to use them now because they fear losing them later on. But yes, Feanor also going to get some kills here on the Falathrim, as the Footmen of Amras are going to be superior. I mean, to be fair, actually, the NIRNIAETH It's very similar kinds of units. I'd say without both levels of armour upgrades, they're probably better than the Footmen of Amorous actually, but they're not here in enough numbers by any means. Javelins coming forth from the Marines of Aglarest again, trying to do some damage here to Gondolin as they really clean up the Falathrim front line. I don't think the Falathrim are going to win this fight, to be honest, either as the last man standing or as the ones who get the most kills. Gallants of the White Wing are up in melee here. Marksmen of Balar are also, of course, decent in melee, but when you're talking about going up against an upper tier unit of line infantry, as they are now, it's not going to go that well for them. Scouts of Eglar, so the Falathrim already losing half of their men. There's a bit of cavalry action going on here once more. Hunts of Caligorm are routing actually. The Foresters of Brythombar doing their thing, revealing themselves from the trees. And those routing units are going to go through the stakes, which will almost certainly be the end of all of them. More Hunts of Caligorm over here. This little Helm's Deep that the Falathrim have formed up is doing a little bit better than they fared on the open plains against Gondolin with all their slings and armour-piercing weaponry. But even so, the Falathrim are not going to be able to make too many inroads uphill against Feyenoor in that fashion. More arrows coming in. Retainers of the King and the Champions of the Fountain being committed in, which is terrible news really for the Mariners of Arendil and the Brythombar units that are on the front line, especially those Champions of the Fountain, pretty much tailor-made to take on lighter infantry like the Brythombar units. Really, really bad news for them. Also, Scouts of the Tree, pretty good in melee. Oh no, they use clubs in melee, that's it. They're armour-piercing in melee, they don't pull out 2 axes. That's a different unit I was thinking of. Probably something from the Haladin actually, now that I think about it, but Scouts of the Tree are going to get charged here. Very nice little utility unit, the Scouts of the Tree. Scouts of Aglarest, I mean, they do get a nice charge there, but they do need to cycle out. They are melee cavalry as well, so they're not going to be able to get quite as much value off from those charges as Feyenoor may have done. Sentries of Galleon moving around now. What have we got over here? Defenders of Aglon. So this is a little force over here from Feyenoor, which are going to have to move back because Ossiriand are heading around this way, making their presence felt. Hunters of Rathloriel are here. So yeah, they're coming around this way now. Interesting that Feyenoor have been allowed to occupy this hill, but of course when it's most kills wins, you kind of have to be a little bit more aggressive. And no one's going to attack into Feyenoor as they are now. At least no one was going to attack into Feyenoor fully as they were at the start. Now that they've taken a little bit of damage from the Falathrim, Gondolin might be tempted to do so just to try and pick up some kills, but I think Ossiriand are probably going to need to make their move in this battle sooner rather than later, otherwise the kill count could start to get away from them a little bit. I would say Gondolin are probably in pole position at the moment. I really love the capes on the Retainers of the King, they look fantastic. Well, there goes, I think that's probably the Falathrim general. Marksman of Balar, I mean, the Falathrim at this point have been scoured from the field pretty much entirely. So yeah, safe to say that Sturi was the full guy in this fight. But I mean, Ossiriand are definitely going to be the healthiest going into the late game, and they're also going to have plenty of ammunition to try and pick apart their foes. So this could work out very well for them. It could be the sort of the classic way for Ossiriand to approach a free-for-all. May actually serve them on this occasion as well. It kind of depends though on what the other teams decide to do. I mean, Gondolin looks like they're going to pull backwards to more of a Helm's Deep, and they are also still trading blows with Feyenoor. Footmen of Amras losing to the Armourers of the Hammer, as perhaps you'd expect. I think in terms of those numbers, the Footmen would turn that around if that fight was left as it was, but of course something else is probably going to interrupt that fight anyway. And indeed, Defenders of Aglon are moving forward. They'll chuck out a bit more damage. Footmen of Amras getting into position. Ono Hyando and San Arthad, or Athrad I should say. There you can see the armour piercing, the green trails, which should be familiar after seeing the their name escapes me. The Horse Archer unit for Fingolfin. Not the Arqueni. Or is it the Arqueni? Yes, it's the Arqueni Findicano, isn't it? That's the one. They've got the armour piercing projectiles, and they're going to be firing in to... They're going to be picking and choosing, really, against armoured targets, and they are going after the Armourers of the Hammer, a very deadly unit. Maybe not so much for Syrian, though. And there you can also see Spear Host of Brythombar. You could try and actually pad your kill count a little bit by hunting down routing units. Although 25 probably isn't going to make all that much difference. Sentries of Galleon riding across front line. They may have used up all their ammunition already, actually. But the Scouts of Galleon have not, and the Earthinen Tower most certainly have not either. So they're going to try and move in here, use their archers to good effect. what they choose to shoot into could make all the difference here, because firing into the front of shield bearers of the tower or retainers of the king, all of this sort of more armoured and shielded affair is probably not going to yield that many kills. And of course the marksman of the Heavenly Arch is still here in the back pocket as well, which very, very difficult to skirmish with them. What have we got going on over here? Routing foresters. They're going to take the long way around here, the horse archers. Everyone's stepping off from one another for the moment. Feanor's still up on that hill. Ossiriand going around the back end as well, with an escort of Randirim. So really both of the specialty projectiles that Ossiriand still have back there. I don't know how much ammunition they have left per se. Still some shield bearers. I mean, Feanor's infantry is still pretty healthy. Their cavalry at this point has almost been completely expended, but when you're trying to be aggressive and getting kills, that can certainly happen to your cav. I think the only cavalry on the field now is J-Monster's sentries, but again, the amount of damage they can do on a charge is going to be fairly limited. Hunters of Wrath L'Oreal getting into position now, though. I think as well these lighter javelins have got more range, which means you can use them to skirmish more easily than more hard target javelins, which you have to get more, you know, closer really, and they're less for skirmishing and more for shock damage. These javelins are going to be coming in again. The amount of damage they're going to do to, again, bulkier units like the shield bearers is going to be more limited, but it will give Gondolin something to think about, and they may have to move further back here. And if they turn their backs as well, the shield value is not going to be coming into effect either. Keep an eye on that cavalry in the backfield, which is mopping up those routing units. Which, when you're the only one to have cavalry still remaining on the field, that is something you can most definitely do when the rules are as they are in this fight. Still some shield bearers of the tower. I mean, they're still in range here, and they're just happy to try and soak up this damage. And I'm sure Ossiriand will be happy to utilise all their ammunition and get as many kills as possible, but sort of a mid-game lull here, which is quite interesting considering how chaotic free-for-alls usually are. Randirim are hiding, Ossiriand are hiding, or Ondo-Hiando, or Ono-Hiando. Missing out the D. I think that translates to literally stone hewers, which is pretty cool. Definitely lends credence to the fact that they were added in anticipation of the Nalgrim. Here we go, Marks on the Heavenly Arch. Looks like they're out of ammunition now, though. I do love some of the swords for the Gondolin models, I think. Where are they? Yeah, there they are. The champions of the fountain have got like runes on their swords as well, which is really cool. Gondolin, though, in sort of continued retreat, and this is a problem for them. Like, they don't really have an answer to this, other than they either need to retreat or charge forward into Ossiriand. But of course, if they do that, all's fair in love and war, and Feyenoor will definitely come in from behind and reap really most of the rewards from that. So they don't really want to allow that, because I'm pretty sure Gondolin will be aware of the fact that Feyenoor, at this point, are probably closest to them in terms of kills, because they also feasted upon the Falathrim. More javelins coming in. Again, not a ton of kills, but they've got plenty of ammunition, and really proving to be a bit of an issue, this for Gondolin. This is a pretty good example of what you can do with these lighter javelins. So I'm glad we've seen this, because I'm sure most people would say, well, non-armor piercing javelins that don't do quite so much damage, even if they have tons of ammo, it's not going to be terribly useful in a real battle situation. Not so, because they definitely have their place. And especially with the fact that they're quite ubiquitous actually throughout quite a few rosters. You're going to see quite a lot of them, and it is something you will need to prepare for in battle. Forward come the Footmen of Amrest. They are going to catch the Hunters of Wrath L'Oreal out a little bit actually, and this is going to convince the Green Elves to use some of their archers in the backfield, although against Feyenoor from the front that's less likely to be terribly useful. Feyenoor also, in an effort to flank around, I think they actually came across these Green Elf skirmishers more by accident than design, but they will absolutely take that. Defenders of Aglon will do brilliantly against the Ossiriand. This was the unit I was thinking about. Yeah, they pull out 2 axes in melee, which can be useful against lighter units, but lighter units in Feyenoor's roster are few and far between. Shield Bearers of Halaborn are there, Randirim. I mean, they'll hold the line, but they will give up a lot of kills here, which is fairly key, of course. So what will Ossiriand do now, especially now that they're being attacked in a 2-pronged assault? Their skirmishing is not going to be tolerated anymore. Kinsmen of Denethor could get on the front line, but yeah, in melee this is going to be tough. I mean, this is the thing, like, this was always going to be the Achilles heel of this sort of Ossiriand army, because Gondolin have obviously got all of the tools they need, as have Feyenoor, and if they decide to focus on Ossiriand and try and get themselves more kills, there's not much Ossiriand are really going to be able to do about that, to be honest with you, because they could try and squirrel away some of their units in the backfield, but even if they do that, they're not going to get the kills necessary to go on to win the fight. So it's a fairly decisive blow. This Marks with a Heavenly Arch coming in melee. Heavy Elven Archers, of course, have always been pretty good in melee. I don't think they'll be quite up to the task of killing the Kinsmen of Denethor, but they will engage them in melee nonetheless. And Feanor, the Accursed of Alcolonde are pretty much a nightmare for the Green Elves in melee. It's a horrible foe for them to try and bring down. They don't really have anything in pure melee that I would recommend sending against the Accursed, to be honest with you. It's definitely all about trying to charge them with cavalry and hitting them with skirmish fire. But at this point, of course, when you're being attacked in quite such a vicious fashion, it's going to be difficult. Footman of Amras, though, going to lose a fair few to the Earthen End Tower, but it's a drop in the ocean, really, at this point for Feanor. Feanor probably going to really fancy their chances going into the late game, because the Falathrim did more damage to Gondolin, and this cavalry is also going to be doing more damage to Gondolin, and Feanor, I think, are definitely going to be the ones to win the last man standing, but also they're going to be able to clean up in terms of kills as the game gets into its final phases, and that could be really, really good news for them. Here, though, a ton of Sentries of Galleon. This could be a way for the Green Elves to inflict a bit of extra damage, and they will be able to get a few more kills like this, but of course they are lighter horse archers. Outriders of Dweilwyn actually will be able to get some really good damage off the charge, so that is worth bearing in mind. And they are actually, well, I mean, champions of the Fountain, though. Like, when the cavalry gets in and amongst them, those swords are going to do horrid, horrid damage to the lightly armoured Ossiriand riders. Back over here, Shield Bearers of Halavorn on the front line. You can see actually over here, it's like a sort of three-way fight. Gondolin in the middle of a Green Elf Feanor sandwich. And it is within Feanor's best interest to do this, I think, because Gondolin, I think, still are the leaders in terms of kills. Outriders of Dweilwyn. Maybe this cavalry could have the desired effect. They need to get out of melee with the Accursed in double quick time, though, because that's exactly how you want to deal with them. Plenty of the Accursed died because of that rear charge, but you don't want to stay in melee with them. Like, they are a very scary unit, as are the champions of the Fountain. Meanwhile, back here, Feanor overrunning the skirmish line. Scouts of Galleon trying to do their best with their two daggers. Bit of AP there, but I mean, even though they vastly outnumber the defenders of Aglon, it is definitely a lopsided engagement in terms of quality, that. Footman of Amras now winning against the Earthen because of the numbers discrepancy. Shield Bearers losing, though. They already took a little bit of damage after all. Another charge, so it's all going on, really. And at this point, it's just who comes out of the mosh pit with the bloodiest swords. And I don't know, Gondolin went into this fight with the most kills. I'm not sure whether they're going to come out of it with the most kills, though, because I think they're probably going to fall away first. I'm not sure. I mean, Feanor also sort of completely enveloping this engagement. Accursed of Alcolonde getting into the retainers of the king, and the Otorn Mighty Mo surrounding the kinsmen of Denethor, who are holding their ground irresolutely. But again, they are spears, so the amount of damage they can actually do is going to be questionable against a unit of such high defence like the Otorn. Champions of the Fountain, of course, are going to tear their way through Scouts of Galleon like they weren't even there. Scouts of the Tree could be quite useful, actually, for hunting down stragglers from the House of Feanor, and that's exactly what they're being used for over here. Those clubs that they wield being put to good use. Over here, meanwhile, Footman of Amras, still pretty healthy, actually, 83 of them. And they should be enough to defeat a spear unit. Shield Bearers of the Tower can hold a line reasonably well, but you would imagine that the line infantry there would come out on top. Footman of Amras are there. Feanor definitely doing some good things. The Scouts of Galleon going to be cleaned up by some battered remnants of Feanor here in the backfield at this point, because I think it's all eyes really on this engagement over here and who can get the most out of this. I'm not sure whether the Accursed did the right thing by attacking the retainers of the king, to be honest with you, because they can stand up to them better than most. They will, of course, still do some pretty nasty damage to them and possibly snag the general as well, but we shall see. Shield Bearers of the Tower. I also noticed as well that the champions of the Fountain are in here, which, again, any soft targets that are in here are going to get torn through. Although, to be fair, at this point, Gondolin and Feanor really just surrounding the kinsmen of Denethor and leaving it at that. So a lot of you, it's still quite chaotic, really. Like I said, I would definitely, I mean, to be fair, I don't even know if Feanor would outright win. I think if Gondolin are the last ones standing, I'd be shocked if they weren't the ones with the most kills by the end of this. To be fair, most of their good work has come in melee, and sort of the invisible killer in a match like this can be how well the skirmishers have been used. Well, there goes the Ossiriand general. Not too surprising, there are the champions of the fountain. Some more armourers of the hammer coming in as well, trying to get in there, and also enveloping actually the Otorn Mightymo, which is bad news for the House of Feanor, because they will start to fall away as well. I mean, the Otorn are a higher tier unit than the armourers of the hammer, but that is a good armour-piercing unit that they're facing. The sort of the horsehair mane effect on that helm that they have. More of a high fantasy look to Gondolin, as you would expect. And the Accursed have actually... I think it's more because you can see here the retainers of the king are trying to slip away, and they turn their backs on the Accursed of Alcolonde, which has ended up in their general being slain on the field. Feanor holding back these scouts of the tree and the shield bearers of the tower. More shield bearers of the tower, and more it's actually looking like Gondolin are going to be the ones to win. Can they win based on their sort of victories in melee alone, though? Or have the hidden effects of those more hidden effects of the skirmish damage throughout the course of the match been key? I'd be surprised if it was, to be honest with you, but we'll see. Shield bearers of the tower. I mean, I think it's fairly clear at this point that Gondolin are going to go on to win the fight, because Feanor simply won't have enough. Unless... do the Green Elves still have something, or are all these routing units? No, those are all routing units. Are there still hidden units, though? Do the Falathrim still have something hidden away in the trees? Well, there goes the Green Elves. Gone. Defenders of Aglon over there. I mean, there's still a decent amount of time left in this battle, so I would assume someone somewhere has got hidden units. Which, in a battle all about kills, I don't know how useful that's necessarily going to be. If your intent is to blob Gondolin up and use javelins on them or the like, however, then now would be the time to reveal them, to be honest with you, because if the rest of Feanor's army does get conquered, then Gondolin will not remain blobbed up for long. I have to say, I think the shield bearers of the tower have been a really effective front line in this fight. Definitely very good at holding the line. Armourers of the hammer for the damage. Good skirmish support with their heavy archers and their slings, and then of course they've got a bit of that X factor going on. The gallants of the White Wing have perished over the course of the fight, but they still have the mighty champions of the fountain and the retainers of the king, depleted though they may be from their brush with the Accursed of Alcolonde. Don't know what Frodor Baggin is doing. Maybe there are Falathrim units hidden in those trees, and he's trying to lead Gondolin over there. If there aren't, then I'm not entirely sure what Feanor are trying to do, and there they go. So, Feanor and Ossiriand are gone, so that must mean that the Falathrim have got hidden units. It's the only explanation for what we are seeing. And I'm wondering what that could be. Could it be a unit of foresters? I mean, if it is, they're going to get absolutely torn limb from limb with not really many kills to show for it. And they're going to have to go into the trees. Usually sort of like the Vietnam memes are made about Syrian as a faction more so than the Falathrim, but that is what's going to be going on over here. So they're going to have to try and scour the map here, Gondolin, which is kind of an interesting situation to be in. I can't, like the Falathrim, they had a big army come out here, so I can't imagine it's anything more than one, maybe two units that they have hidden in it. Could it be something elite? We didn't see too many elites from the Falathrim. What could possibly be hidden in the trees, though, that is of good quality? I mean, the Aranki Lim are of good quality, but it's not really this kind of damage that you want to be chucking out. Best of the javelins, probably the Marines of Eglarest. What is the meaning of this tomfoolery? Archers of Amrod running. I think they're actually being chased, trying to get a couple more kills here, Gondolin. Right, what have we? That's just routing units as well. I assume that units this close to the red line are also routing. Indeed, marksmen they have in the arch, actually, Gondolin troops. Surprising. And it is those Archers of Amrod, I think that's the General's unit actually for Feanor, which is quite interesting. Right, I think actually we will go up to ×6 speed to sort of motor our way through this, because I'm not entirely sure what the Falathrim are hoping to accomplish. They are the only ones left on the field that haven't admitted defeat or been outright sort of swept away. So it has to be them that are holding out on us. There's still enough time for them to get into melee, but what do they intend to do? I'd be really disappointed in Stewie if he ends up doing nothing. And that might be what ends up happening, to be honest with you, because the time is ticking down. And he may just not want to feed more kills into Gondolin, but we'll see. We shall see. I think this is just going to go to the end. Kind of depends really on what they had left, I suppose, as to whether it would be worth going in, but one Hunter of Rathloriel. The minimap abandons us because there's only one routing green elf left on the field, so yeah, I don't think the Falathrim are going to go into melee, which is a little bit disappointing, whatever they had left. It might have just been like 7 foresters or so, but you may as well throw them in at that point. Bit of a strange ending, but a chaotic fight nonetheless. What do they have left then? It was nothing, wasn't it? Weird. I wonder why the game didn't end. Quite bizarre. Nonetheless, I guess the Falathrim didn't have anything left, and it was counting the routing units from the Green Elves, which is a little strange. Anyway. So, the most kills, yeah, goes to Gondolin. Excuse me. Good thing that I'm only recording this one today, otherwise I think my voice would give out. So yeah, Gondolin winning the battle, 2,000 kills, and they were also the last one standing, so it was a victory in every sense really for Gondolin. They dealt with the initial attack from the Falathrim really very, very well. Don't know if the Falathrim had the right kind of build for a game like this. I'd be really tempted to go more elite with the Falathrim given the kind of battle that it was. Really surprised not to see the Nobles of Balar, for instance. They would have been able to equalise on the front line really rather nicely. But still, it is what it is. Like you take an army and you live and die by it. Gondolin did well against them. They did well against the Green Elves as well. The Green Elves were trying to skirmish with the enemy, and the longer the Green Elves were allowed to skirmish, the more likely it would have been that they could have won, because they still had ammunition left. They still had some javelins. They still had quite a lot of arrows as well, which could have made up the difference of 600 kills in and of themselves, as well as a more advantageous melee engagement for them. That could have left the Green Elves being victorious, but in the end, they weren't allowed to skirmish, which was exactly what you need to do against the Green Elves. You can't allow them to just sit there and skirmish you, because they will do damage to you enough to win the fight, generally speaking, if you allow them to get away with that, especially now with the sort of long-range, high ammunition, lower damage javelins, which the Green Elves can make good use of with the Hunters of Rathloriel. You really don't want to be allowing them to sort of sit and shoot like that. Even if they've got lighter armour, on this occasion there was all of the ammunition had already been expended by everyone else. Feanor also did pretty well. I think Feanor's big problem in this fight was the fact they occupied the hill. They did well initially against the Falathrim. They went after the Green Elves with Gondolin right from the off, which is fair enough, but I think they probably should have turned on Gondolin sooner, because Gondolin were the ones that were really reaping rewards from that as well as Feanor, and Gondolin already had the lead in that situation. So I think they probably should have gone after Gondolin a little earlier, and that could have turned the battle around fairly substantially, either in the Green Elves' favour or in Feanor's favour, but you stood more of a chance, I think, as Feanor if you went after Gondolin a little sooner. And J-Monster tried to bide his time, tried to use his skirmishes, as you're going to do with an army like that as the Green Elves, but in the end, 2 players conspired against him to stop him from doing that, so it's not really too surprising there. It's interesting that it's saying that J-Monster finished second even though he got less kills and less prisoners than Feanor, which is weird, but obviously we can see so first Gondolin, second Feanor, third the Green Elves, fourth the Falathrim. Let's see what did the damage for the Green Elves though, because it'll be interesting to see how their skirmishes actually did in a battle like this. The Outriders of Dweilwen got some really nice charges off when things were starting to fall apart for the Green Elves, which is good. Scouts of Gellion, the Horse Archers, did really quite well. Earth Tower weren't really able to use their ammunition, which is a shame. Randirin were maybe used a little bit too early on a target that wasn't really all that relevant. Kinsmen of Denethor, they kept themselves alive in a really sticky situation for an extended period of time, but kills-wise you can't really draw any conclusions about them, to be honest with you, because that was a horrid engagement for any unit. The Ondo Hyando did decently, 93 kills. Again, maybe they were used a little bit soon as well, but to be fair, if they had been saved, they would have suffered the fate of most of the other Ossiriand archers, where a lot of their ammunition has probably been left over because of the quick attack they suffered. Hunters of Rathlorian, not a lot of kills as you can see, but again, they're all about just poking and prodding the enemy, skirmishing with them. And they can do a job in melee as well, but in the situation that J-Monster found himself in again, it was a full attack from 2 players, so they decided to eliminate him from proceedings. But yeah, big thank you to J-Monster himself for sending this replay to me. The first of 3, possibly 4 even, Silmarillion replays that will be done over the course of the next couple of weeks, which is nice to see some of the new work that they have been doing on this mod. One of which is going to be a large-scale siege on the Doors of Angband map with Angband on the defence, and 4 Elven factions on the attack, which will probably be the next Silmarillion replay you see, to be honest. And following on from that as well, I've got a battle replay from Kamul, who I think that's another sort of 3v3. I don't know if it's a siege per se, but it's on a sort of unique map, so that'll be something else to look out for as well. So yeah, that'll be the other 2 that we'll definitely be doing. I think I've got another one as well, which we might be doing as well. And obviously we'll be continuing with the Reforger replays as well. Got Siege of Azanul Bazaar with the Dwarves on the defence. Got the themed Siege of Khan Doom, which will be coming up, and a couple of other things as well. I think there's another Evil Siege as well, unless I'm very much mistaken. But regardless, plenty to be getting on with, but I'm always willing to accept more, of course, if you want to DM me on Discord. So yeah, big thank you to J-Monster and all the players that are part of this one. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.